is blue dust. She's out walking her dog. She says that she feels lost in the San Francisco fog. This time she is run so far away from home, and she is resting with that. Oh, she might never make it back. And goes on to explain, keeps smiling through the day. She's learning to shake it off. And that side in the San Francisco fog. I like the rain, I like the wind. Isn't anyone near your breath? I like the dark and I like the cold. Can anyone reach this soul? In that time, in that time, in that San Francisco fog. In that time, in that time, in that San Francisco fog. She's that kind of girl, makes you think you can save the world. And you go rescue him. You're gonna wanna be more than friends if there is some way to unwind or turn back the hands of time. You know she take back all she lost in that San Francisco fog. I like the rain, I like the wind. Isn't anyone there your friend? I'm like the dark, I'm like the cold. Can anyone reach your soul? Unlike the rain, unlike the wind. Isn't anyone there your friend? Unlike the dark and unlike the cold. Can anyone reach your soul? Is there anyone who understands? Here in the San Francisco fog. That's San Francisco fog. Oh yeah. In the San Francisco fog. If you are gone to San San Francisco. I hope you meet some gentle people there in the sun, in the sun, in the sun, in the San Francisco Ball, in the sun, in the sun, in the San Francisco Ball. Don is in the house.
Thank you, Walt. Good evening, everybody. So, on behalf of Bonnie and Max and Cooper, I'd like to welcome you all. Okay, can you hear me? Is
Yes.
it better? Do I have to do this the whole time, this close?
Yes.
It's kind of intimate. So, on behalf of Bonnie and Max and Cooper, it's my privilege to welcome you all here tonight to celebrate the life of David Lee Richardson. First, I want to thank all of you for being here, and in particular, thank John and Janice Benton for all of their help in allowing us to use this property, and Justin and Kelly Saunders for all of their help in allowing us to use this property. And my name is Don Ransdell, also known as Jaws in certain circles. And Dave Richardson has been my closest friend for the last 50 years or so. Dave and I met in 1970. We were going to ASU. We lived at a place called La Mancha, which was right down the street. Dave was the first year in law school. I was a freshman at ASU. We had a tight group of friends, about 8 or 9 of us. Everybody's nickname was Jaws. And oddly, if all the Jaws were at one table like this, having dinner or drinks or something, if you were talking to one specific Jaws across the table, you could say, "Hey, Jaws," and only that Jaws would look at you. It's telepathic. Anyway, so Dave and I got to be close friends at La Mancha. We worked together in the office at La Mancha the first year, and then we worked in the cafeteria. We were both dishwashers in the cafeteria. And then he and I were roommates in the mid-'70s. He bought a house on 41st Place, and I moved in with him. Eventually Bonnie moved in, and then eventually she kicked me out. And I've been close to Dave ever since. I've moved around a little bit, but we stayed in close touch. I lived in Chicago. I lived in New Jersey. I was back here. I'm now in Kansas City. But Dave and I talk once or twice a week, every other week. It would be rare if we didn't talk for 3 weeks. And when we talked for quite a long time. So I'm close to Dave. I'm probably closer to Dave, or had been closer to Dave than anybody else in my entire life. And it's an honor to celebrate his life today and to share my remembrances of Dave. And I know many of you know Dave and know him probably almost as well or more than I did. He's an interesting individual, to be sure. Unique. I've never met anybody like Dave, even remotely like Dave. He had a tremendous amount of interesting facets to his personality. He was smart, one of the smartest guys I've ever met in my life. He loved reading. He loved fly fishing. He loved rugby. And there are a lot of smart people who like to read and like to fly fish, and probably a couple that like rugby. But nobody quite liked Dave. So when I think about Dave and what made Dave the person that he is, the kind of the essence of Dave, one thing comes to mind first, and that is Dave was, I think, hardwired to help people. He just did it like automatically, and it manifested most visibly in his professional life, right? He was an attorney, we all know that. He was an excellent attorney. He loved the law. He loved the puzzle of navigating his client through the legal maze that they were in. And he was great at it. And his MO in that was that he would, and Lou's here and some other people have worked with him closely, and they know this, he would get in the trenches with his client. He would live his client's problems. And I remember talking to him one time, he said, Joss, so I call him Joss, you like lived the problems for these people, and I think you care about it more than they did. And I think he did. He worked long hours, spent a lot of nights away from home. It was stressful, but he was committed to having a positive outcome for each one of his clients, and he did, I'm sure, more often than not. But again, it's stressful and just the way that he was wired. And it wasn't just his professional life. Dave helped people, all kinds of people that he barely knew he helped. I'm sure most of you out there knew people, or Dave helped you. Dave helped me countless times in my life, and he helped me a lot of times when I didn't really even need help, but he couldn't resist helping me. It was just the way he was. I'd be talking about a business issue that I had, and he would tell me how to solve it. I'd say, okay, yeah, I know, I got it. It's my business. But that was just Dave. He was just that way. Dave also, I think, was gifted in his ability to connect with people almost immediately and on a fairly basic and almost primal level. He got to know people really quickly and really well. And people, for some reason, opened up to Dave. And maybe it was the questions that he asked them. And Dave didn't often reciprocate. He kind of played things close to the vest, but people opened up to him, and he got to know people really well, and he knew tons of people, I guess, as evidenced by all of us being here. And he knew people all over the country. And it just surprised me. We would run into somebody he knew in some random location. When the kids were little, we took them horseback riding up in North Phoenix. And as we were finishing horseback riding, he ran into some ranch hands that he knew from Idaho or Montana. And we talked for like an hour. It seemed like an hour, probably more like a half an hour. And it just, people out of nowhere. One time, another example, we went water skiing. We were at Bartlett Lake. This is back in the 70s when there's like nobody out there. It's just the two of us. And I know you're supposed to have a third person holding the flag, but we didn't. So we're out on Bartlett Lake. We're way out in the lake. We skied all afternoon. It was great. The sun's starting to set. We come back in. We run out of gas in the main body of the lake, just barely in the main body of the lake. And we're probably 3/4 of a mile away from the boat ramp. And so I get in the water. I'm pulling the boat. Dave's pushing from behind, then we switch, and eventually we see a campfire off to the right, about halfway between where we were and the boat ramp. So we head for the campfire. We get to the campfire, beach the boat, walk up to the people. Dave knew them. We had dinner, we had drinks, they had gas, we got back to the boat ramp. Might have been somebody here, for all I know. He just had this ability to get close to people quickly, and a lot of times it formed bonds that lasted a lifetime. Again, as evidenced by many of you here. I learned a new word a couple of months ago, mundita. Mundita, M-U-N-D-I-T-A, is Sanskrit. It means taking delight in the pleasure of others. And when I read the definition, I thought immediately of Dave. Because Dave truly did take a great deal of pleasure or delight in the success and in the pleasures of the people that he knew well. He was proud of Bonnie and all the success that she achieved. He was proud of Max. He was proud of Cooper and their accomplishments. He was proud of John and Janice and their accomplishments. He was proud of Stephanie when she started her law firm. He was certainly proud of his siblings and his sister Patty when she went to law school at an advanced age beyond where many people go to law school.
Way to go.
He just had such care and empathy for the people that he knew and loved. And again, I think that's evidenced by a lot of us being here today. He just took deep, deep pleasure in the pleasure of his friends and family. And I heard about it all the time. John Gillen had a business. I don't know if John's here or not. I heard about it. Robin and Bob, tricks. I heard about it. I heard about it all the time because Dave was proud of it. He just loved the fact that his friends, his colleagues were successful or had some success in his life. And it's a rare thing to have somebody that's that empathetic and in your corner that way. Of course, it cut both ways. So when something bad happened, he felt bad. So I remember talking to him on the phone one time, talking about one of the many horrific, terrible things that happened to me in my life. I don't know what happened. I lost a job or got divorced or something. And so I told him about it. He goes, Jaws, I feel like I took a punch in the gut. And he did. I mean, that was the kind of empathy that he had. So, a rare thing, indeed. Dave was unique, authentic. There was no pretense about Dave. What you see, or what you saw, was what you got. There were no putting on airs. There was no act. He dressed essentially the same, apart from his court costume. He looked exactly, well, he dressed the same as he did the first time I met him. He's a jeans and t-shirt kind of guy, maybe set off by a yellow pair of quilted sneakers. He was just true to himself, and that authenticity, I think, helped him make connections with people. He was not into fads. He and I never went to the disco together. He never owned a pair of platform shoes. At least not that I'm aware of. Just a genuine, great human being. Dave was also thrifty. You might know this. One could say he was frugal to a fault. Dave didn't like buying anything new. I can't tell you the number of times I'd be driving down the street with Dave and I'd see a garage sale sign and hope that Dave didn't see it. But, as fate would have it, Dave would see it. He'd go, hey, Jaws, garage sale, mind if we stop? I'd sag visibly like an animal taking a bullet. No, let's go. So we'd peruse the garage sale and we'd come out with a lawnmower or tools. He had lots of tools. And he didn't like having anybody fix things for him either. It was kind of a weird thing. Bonnie mentioned in his obituary that early on in his career he would take things in trade for his legal fees. And at one time we lived on 41st Street. We had 2 trucks that he got in trade and a boat, the Cajun Esprit, which you may still have.
We do.
And all kinds of stuff. And one time we were walking into the house and we were walking through the door. Dave turns to me and goes, "Jaws, everything I own is broken." And I look around and it was. But he
Still is.
he just had this thing about doing it himself, and it was great for most of the time until he got too sick to do that. And he'd get pissed off. Like one day, I don't know where he was. I was here alone, and I thought, oh, I'll straighten things up in the backyard. And I put a bunch of stuff in the shed and organized things. And he got home. He was so pissed off that I did that. I mean, seriously, it was amazing. So he really liked managing things on his own. Just a unique guy that way. Dave was a private individual, to be sure. I mentioned that when he met people and they opened up to him, he didn't reciprocate often. He not that he was secretive, he wasn't, but he just didn't share a lot with people other than his closest friends and family. So when he got sick, a lot of people didn't know for quite some time, and I can't explain why that is. I know the kids didn't know for a long time, and his siblings I don't think knew for some time, and he just felt the need to kind of own it and hold it. And I remember one time he and Bonnie having a frothy conversation about letting somebody know, and Dave making the point that this is my cancer. I'll tell people when I want to tell people. And so he really kept things close to the vest, and he was very private that way. Above all, Dave was a family man. He loved his family, Bonnie, Max, Cooper, with every fiber of his being. He did everything he could for them. In the last few years, his primary focus was making sure that they were taken care of, and that oriented everything he did toward the end. So Dave was diagnosed, as you probably know, with prostate cancer in 2007, and he left us on May 2nd. So he fought it for a long time. And most of those years were really good years. He worked, he did everything he wanted to do leisurely, participating with the family. They were really, really good years. And the last 3 years or so were not quite as good. And so he left us on May 2nd. I was here. Bonnie and I were here. And he was out of it all day. Unconscious, fighting for breath, barely breathing. But the day before, he was pretty lucid for a lot of the time. And so I got here in the morning and chatted with Bonnie for a little while, then went back to the bedroom and saw Dave. And I said, "Joss, I'm here." He didn't say anything. I said, "Are you okay?" Stupid question. And then he said, "Yeah, Joss, I'm here." And I said, "Were you in pain?" He said, "Comes and goes." I said, "All right." And then, in an effort to make conversation, I said, "Joss, you cannot believe the fucking traffic on the 101 coming down. It took me like an hour and a half It was backed up at Via Ventura, backed up again at Thomas. It was a mess. I finally get here, and it was nerve-wracking. And in pure Dave fashion, laying there, says, "Jaws, you'll pardon me if I don't prioritize the traffic on the 101 right now." Fair point. So we chatted for a while, and then I left and came back later on in the afternoon, and he and I were there alone, and I was sitting in the chair next to his bed, and he said feebly, "Are you close?" I said, "Yeah, I'm right here in the bed, or next to your bed, in the chair." He goes, "Well, get close." So I got as close as I could to the bed, and he said, "Hold my hand." So I held his hand, and I knew that I'd better take the opportunity to tell him how much I loved him and what he meant to me. And so I did. And, as soon as you start saying that kind of stuff, I'm crying uncontrollably. But I get it out. And we sat there for a while. And then he goes, "Joss?" "Yeah." He goes, "You're holding too tight." Okay. Those were the last words he said to me. "You're holding too tight." So I miss him a great deal. I know a lot of us do. He was the best friend I've ever had. I love him dearly. Joss, you can hear me. Thanks for being my friend. Love you, brother. That's all I've got.
Jaws, that was as good as it could ever be. Thank you for this wonderful presentation that you made. I'm John Benton. Janice, myself, our children, Katie, who's here with us tonight, JT, who's here with us tonight, and Betsy, had the wonderful joy of living next to Bonnie and David and the kids for all these decades. He was a very special guy. We had a chance to do a lot of co-parenting. There could be nobody who had been closer to us than the Richardsons. Now, Jaws did such a fantastic job of talking about the essence of what Dave is. We're going to take a little deviation on this, and we're going to tell some fun stories about David Richardson and how iconoclastic he was and what a special person is. So I'm going to call up JT and Katie and Janice and Jim Chalmers to join me on the stage. Come on up, because I know that these are some people who we've shared some really fun experiences with. There's a number of different groups here. There's family, there's people from City of Tempe that knew David closely, there's neighbors. We are the neighbors and close friends, but there's another special group here. Those of us who shared time with David on hunting and fishing trips and other fun things that we did in the out of doors. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. David was a great outdoorsman. And he was also a lot of fun to have on trips because he always brought a special element. He was a great camp cook. He knew a lot about the outdoors. He had been in Arizona and Utah and Idaho, and we really enjoyed those times together. But there was also something very special about David, which was unique, and that was that he was a varsity world-class snorer. And we experienced this on one of our early camping trips, and I think that maybe you've had a little experience with that. Why don't you tell us a little story about our first trip in Missouri and the A-frame and the time we spent together?
So in picking fishing and hunting companions, there's several criteria. People are walking around with loaded guns or fly rods, and so you're looking for good judgment, which David had, and you're also in close quarters a lot, and somebody you like and that you get along with. But another quality, which turns out to be very important, is you're frequently sleeping in small motel rooms or tents or whatever, and being a silent sleeper is a real asset. And David failed miserably on this criterion. So we're in this little A-frame, and for some reason, I don't think John or I had any experience with this. It was kind of came out of the blue. But the three of us are in this A-frame, and I can only describe it as a seismic event. And,
Well, actually, Jim, I thought that there had been a railroad track that had been put very close to our accommodation.
so long and short of it is in this little A-frame, there wasn't really any place to go other than outside. It was pretty cold. But anyway, we survived it. And I just have to say that subsequent to that trip, or I should say prior to that trip, on occasion I'd see Bonnie looking kind of tired, and I'd always assumed it was because she was so tired from trying to make Tempe green. But subsequent to that trip, it's occurred to me that maybe there was another explanation.
Oh, that's great, Jim, and that's true. You know, we used to take hunting trips down in southeast Arizona, and at that point, we had figured out Dave's sleeping patterns, so we made him sleep outside on a cot. And there was various occasions when we would wake up in the morning and make coffee, and he'd be out in this cot with like 2 or 3 inches of snow on him. But he was such a great guy to spend time with in the out of doors, because he loved it. He loved the companionship of his friends, and the boys went with us, and we had terrific trips into the Grand Canyon, where we would make sure that Dave's tent was 40 or 50 yards away from where our tents were. But it was a lot of fun. But one of the people that enjoyed a lot of that time with us was our son JT, and he has a few reminiscences about David being his neighbor and a good guy.
Thank you. Katie, my sister, just said, "What are you going to pick?" And I thought about this a lot. So I grew up here. And I'll just take a moment to say that it's just so incredible to be back. A few years ago, I moved to Montana, which is a place that David and my father first showed me. And I fell in love with there. And when I heard of David's passing, I sat on the banks of the Gallatin River because I thought that's where he and I would be. Because that's where we spent so much time together, not on that river, but any river. David was a mentor to me in fly fishing, which is kind of central to my life today. And from day one, literally, I sold magazines at school to make enough money to buy my first fly rod, a Martin fly rod. It was $25, and I was casting in the front yard in front of the house between the 2 yards, and the first thing I caught was a cat. Not a catfish. Our cat. I was stripping a fly across the yard as David had taught me to strip a streamer, and the cat thought it was a mouse. The hook got in its paw. Anybody fly fish in the audience today? Well, this cat, man, it took off and it was scream and drag, and I was having a blast. And David went, "Oh shit, he's got the cat." So he helped me rein in the cat. I think it was Champy. Was that the cat's name? My God, feels like a billion years ago. But David and I just had this unbelievable relationship. He was like a father. When he wasn't, he was like a brother. And when he wasn't, he was like a best friend. And we spent so much time together. Partially because when you spent time with David, you spent so much time. And so, just coming, just free form, baby. I was flying in tonight, or this morning, excuse me. Boy, are my arms tired. I was thinking about what story I might tell, and I think the story that I want to tell is the stories. David's ability to pull you in. And he wasn't rushed, and he didn't give a good goddamn if you were either. If he saw that you were antsy or urgent, he'd lower his voice and he'd pull you in. And over 1,000 campfires and long drives, I got to hear David's stories. And it was, thank you. It's okay. And over 1,000 campfires and 100 phone calls, and just hearing David's stories and having the opportunity to hear a real storyteller at work, and the way that he could just pull you in was incredible. One comes to mind. I was driving up 295 on the East Coast from Virginia to Portland, Maine. I was trying to make a long haul. And I was going through a mountainous area of Delaware, and David started a story in southern Delaware, and he finished it in central Pennsylvania. And in that time, I lost coverage 7 or 8 times, and to the best of my memory, for the longest stretch, for about 18 minutes. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to hang up, and I'm not going to interrupt him when he comes back in, because I've heard this story before. And I love the story, and I love the man, and he's not going to know any different. And for 3 hours, he told that story and other stories. And I told him later, I said, David, I heard about a quarter of it, and you kept coming in and out, and he chuckled, and he said, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. And so I guess what I would say is that David's impact on me is to take time with the people that you care about and the people that you love. And don't worry about whether you're rushed or they're rushed, but lean in. Jaws, your mention of David's empathy was just so spot on. He cared about you so much that he didn't care if you had time, because he knew that you would make the time to spend the time with him. And I just am so thankful for the impact that he's had on my life.
Thank you, JT. And that was beautiful. I want to mention one other thing when John was talking about how lucid David was at the end. David kicked my butt consistently playing cribbage through most of April this spring. He would wander over here and we'd play cribbage every afternoon, and it was a delight. And his mental attention to the game was phenomenal. In between the stories we would tell, because cribbage can be a relatively easy game to play and tell stories at the same time. But with us also, I want to pass the mic to Janice, who can talk a little bit about being David's friend, neighbor, and then Katie.
Hi, everyone. I didn't know that I was going to be brought up onto the stage, but thank you for doing that. I would just want to say that Bonnie and David, as our neighbors from the time that our children were tiny, and raising them together and making so many trips together, it's like we were one family. They knew our parents, we knew their parents. To the Richardson family that's all here, I feel like I know you all, because we were included in all of those stories. It's just been a real joy to have them in our lives. And to Bonnie, I don't even know where you are, I'm blinded, but our daughter Betsy is not with us tonight. She lives in North Carolina, and she really wanted to be here. Sends her love to everybody. I'm going to read just a little note that she wrote this afternoon. It says, Mazel to all. David, who I refer to as my David, for a very long time was one hell of a complicated dude. And I can only imagine how thankful he would be to have y'all helping Bonnie do this. He is somewhere fly fishing, low talking, cribbage playing, and overcomplicating things with his handlebar mustache in the sky. I'll have a drink in his honor tonight. Love to Bonnie, Max, and Cooper, and love to David. But Betsy and David did have a kind of funky, fun relationship. He used to tease her all the time, and she would giggle, and it was really pretty special. It's wonderful to have you all here and celebrating the life of a great friend. I'll turn you over to Katie here.
Hi, everyone. That was really nice that Betsy got to be included. That means a lot to us. I'm the oldest, and this is a really nostalgic night for me because I got married in this yard, and it was a very similar setup to this one, including the hurricane globes originated at my wedding almost 22 years ago. And David and Bonnie were incredibly important to my wedding, to my husband Hal. We had a Jewish wedding where, this is not unusual for Jewish weddings, the husband and wives get ready separately, but it's kind of a big deal in a Jewish wedding, and there's the men went to top liquor, and they have to have a whole bar, and they have to have a, sauna thing, which they have over there, schwitz, and my husband's friends from Wisconsin brought in a lot of booze and hung out over there, and David oversaw that about somebody who was joining the 15th Street fold with love and compassion, and my husband hunted and fished with them and played cribbage and was part of that, all of that. And I'm sorry that he can't be here tonight. He's in Washington, D.C., where we live. But the cutest thing that David did is that in a traditional Jewish wedding, there's something called yichud, which is after the wedding, the couple needs to be by themselves for a little bit. You can imagine what this might have meant in the era of arranged weddings and different social mores. Just suffice to say that's not what happened over there at the Richardson house. It was more like, do you think the hors d'oeuvres are coming out on time? Do we have enough liquor? Holy shit, that just happened, etc. But David, one of the rules of those weddings is that, of that event, is that it has to be very private for reasons that you might guess. And David took it upon himself. His job, he was told, was to make sure no one went over there. And I wouldn't be surprised if he had an armed shot, if he was like with a loaded shotgun, because he, we went over there and we had our first moment together as a married couple, and he was like patrolling the perimeter, like a border wall. Before it had been kind of a back and forth, like open borders, but it was like shut down over there. And David took it so seriously, and honestly, it was so sweet because it was indicative of the care that David gave us as a family and the ways that he really showed up about things that he knew were important, even if they were new to him. And I found that so sweet and so moving, and I've never forgotten it. And it's really especially wonderful to share with you all here. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Jim, Janice, JT. Thanks to the Richardsons. And Walt, are you here? Let's have a little more music as the rest of us get to work our way through the wonderful meal that's provided.
Very, very special request here. We played the song Into the Mystics, but Bonnie was talking and she didn't get a chance to hear it. This is one of her favorite tunes. So we're going to go through it this time. We're going to play it again for Bonnie. And this time everybody can sing along. Everybody knows the words, right? I'm joking. This is for you, Bonnie.
We were born for the wind, also younger than the sun. Yeah, the bonnet boats were warm. We sailed into the mist. Hark now, hear the sailors cry. Smell the sea and touch the sky. Let your soul and your spirit fly into the mystery. And when that foghorn blows, I'll be coming home. float and flow into the mystery. And when that foghorn blows, I'll be coming home. And when that foghorn blows, I wanna hear it. I'm not gonna feel it, boy. Rock your soul. Like way back in days of old. And together we will flow into the Mississippi. Because we were born for the wind. Oh, so younger than the sun. That's the bonnie boats will go. We'll sail into the Mississippi. Sail away, sail away, sail away. Thank you so much. Love is sweet, love is fine, turns my water into wine. Heals the weak, frees the blind, flows through every space and time. Listen to me, brother, we got the love on another. Listen to me, brother, you got the love on another. Love is burning in the moon. Yes, this journey guides your course. Friend to touch and the home. Never, never leave us in our home. Listen to me, brother. You got the love of another. I say now listen to me, brother. You got the love of another. I like to see you dancing so happy in the sunshine. So let this be our new old, helpless boy, the young and old, plant and seed, just watch them grow. You're always reaping what you sow. Listen to me, brother, you got to love one another. Say, listen to me, brother, we got to love one another. I like to see you dancing so happy in the sunshine. I like to see you dancing, everything's alright. I like to see you dancing so happy in the sunshine. I like to see you dancing, everything's alright. Everything is alright. Everything is alright. I say love. 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 They want you right. I say love. You know it's what you need. I say love. They want you right. I say love. You know it's what you need. I say love. When you wake up in the morning, I say love. When you come home in the evening, I say love. All through the night, I say love. It makes you feel alright. I say love. It makes you feel alright. I say love. It makes you feel alright. Thank you all so very much. Mr. Tim Sato on violin and vocals, Tom Gates, steel drum and vocals, Hannes Guevara on guitar and vocals. My name is Walt Richardson. Till we meet again, be good to yourselves, take care of one another. Let's give peace a chance, yeah?